The first time I noticed it, I brushed it off. The second time, I told myself it was just the highway playing tricks. But the third time, my stomach tightened into a knot. I leaned toward my husband, Robert, my voice low but firm. "That's the same SUV. Turn around, now." My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 72 years old, retired from my years as a librarian in a small Midwestern town where people still smile at each other in the grocery store. I've been married to Robert for nearly 50 years. He's my anchor, my partner in every sense, and the only person in the world who can tell when something's wrong before I say a word. That morning had started so simply. The air was crisp for late summer. The windows of our old Buick rolled down just enough to let the breeze in. We were on our way to our annual family reunion, a tradition as old as my marriage. Usually, these reunions were filled with laughter, food, and the occasional awkward story retold for the 1,000th time. But this year, I'd been holding my breath for months. For the first time in almost a decade, my son, Michael, had promised he would be there. Michael and I had always been close when he was younger, but somewhere in his 30s, after a failed marriage and a series of questionable business ventures, he drifted into a life I didn't fully understand. There were long silences between calls, vague explanations about his work, and a distance I could feel even when we were in the same room. Still, he was my son, and I was determined to make the most of this rare chance to see him. Robert and I had been driving for over an hour, the road stretching endlessly ahead. The landscape was the same rolling farmland we'd seen all our lives, cornfields swaying in the wind, barns with peeling paint, and the occasional billboard advertising farm equipment. That's when I saw it. A black SUV, newer model, tinted windows. At first it was behind us in the left lane, then it dropped back when we changed lanes. 15 minutes later, it was behind us again. I noticed it because it didn't seem in a hurry. It wasn't tailgating, but it wasn't passing either, just there. I didn't say anything the first time, but 20 miles later, when we'd taken an exit for fuel and snacks, the SUV pulled into the same station, parked on the far end, and didn't even get gas. My pulse quickened. We got back on the road, and sure enough, a few minutes later, it was in my mirror again. Now, here we were, 20 minutes from the reunion, and I couldn't shake the feeling crawling up my spine. Robert glanced at me when I told him to turn around. "Evelyn, what on earth?" "I'm serious," I said. "It's been following us. That black SUV. I've seen it 3 times now." He checked the mirror. "You're sure it's the same one?" "Yes. Same dent on the rear bumper, same missing hubcap." My voice was sharper than I intended. "Don't take us straight to the reunion. Not if someone's following us." Robert didn't argue further. He's a practical man. He slowed, scanning for a place to turn. We took the next wide driveway, spun the Buick around, and headed back the way we'd come. I tried to keep my eyes forward, but I couldn't help glancing in the side mirror. The SUV turned around too. That was all the confirmation I needed. My father had taught me a rule when I was a girl. If you think you're being followed, never lead them home. At 72, home meant anywhere my family was. The reunion wasn't just a gathering. There would be children, cousins, elderly relatives. If this driver meant trouble, I wasn't about to walk them straight to my family's doorstep. I could feel Robert's eyes flicking to me, reading the tension in my jaw. "We'll head toward town," he said. "If they're still back there when we get to the main road, we go straight to the police." I nodded, but my mind was already racing. Who would follow us and why? I thought of Michael, how little I really knew about his life these days. A cold ripple of unease ran through me. That SUV wasn't just out for a leisurely drive, and I was starting to think this had something to do with my son. "All right, let's keep the suspense moving." Robert kept his hands steady on the wheel, but I could tell by the way his knuckles tightened that he'd seen the SUV in the mirror too. The road ahead curved sharply, bordered by tall cornfields on either side. Out here, the stalks might as well have been walls. We were in a green tunnel with nowhere to pull off. "Don't speed," I murmured. "If they're following us, we don't want to give them a reason to pull something stupid." Robert gave a curt nod. "Got it." We took the curve, and for a moment the SUV disappeared from view. My chest loosened, but just as quickly, there it was again, easing around the bend, keeping that same precise distance behind us, not too close, not too far. The silence in the car was loud enough to hurt. At the next intersection, Robert flicked on the blinker and turned right onto County Road 8, a narrow two-lane that cut through patches of woodland before heading into a small town with a police substation. If they were really following us, they'd have no reason to take that turn. I held my breath as the SUV approached the intersection. It slowed, signal flashing, then followed us onto County Road 8. Robert muttered something under his breath that I didn't quite catch. We drove another half-mile before a weathered sign for a gas station came into view, the kind that sold more fishing bait than fuel. "We'll pull in there," Robert said. "See if they keep going." The gravel lot crunched under our tires as we turned in. Robert pulled up beside the single pump. The SUV didn't pass us. Instead, it rolled slowly into the lot, parked across from the entrance, and just sat there, engine running. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Robert pretended to get out and stretch, taking his time, glancing casually in their direction without making it obvious. I stayed in the passenger seat, my pulse hammering in my ears. Through the tinted glass, I couldn't see a face, just the vague silhouette of someone in the driver's seat. "They're not getting gas," Robert said quietly when he slid back into the car. "Not going inside either." "Then we're not staying here," I said. We pulled back onto the road, but instead of heading toward the reunion, Robert made another quick turn onto an even smaller lane, a one-lane road that wound through thick forest toward the county line. I kept glancing back. The SUV followed, still keeping that calculated distance. "Where does this road go again?" I asked. "Loops around toward Miller's Crossing," Robert said. "If we push through another 5 miles, we'll hit the main highway, and from there, the police substation's only 3 minutes out." 5 miles. I clenched my hands in my lap. It felt like forever. Every bend in the road made me wonder if they'd try something. Every shadow between the trees looked darker, more alive. Robert kept his voice even. "Evelyn, whoever's in that SUV, do you think they're after you or me?" I hesitated, my throat tightening. "Neither. I think it might be about Michael." He didn't ask why. Maybe he'd been thinking the same thing. When the road finally widened near the edge of town, Robert made a sharp left, heading straight for the substation. As we turned into the lot, I risked one last look behind us. The SUV slowed at the intersection, then kept going straight, disappearing into the late afternoon haze. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. We parked and Robert went inside to talk to the officer on duty. I stayed in the car, staring at the empty stretch of road where the SUV had vanished, replaying the last 40 minutes in my head. That driver hadn't just been wandering. They'd been following us, and they'd stopped the second we got close to law enforcement. The officer told us to call if we saw the vehicle again and took down a vague description. There wasn't much more they could do, no crime had been committed. So, we got back in the car and drove on to the reunion, but my nerves didn't settle. If this was connected to Michael, I needed to know why. By the time we reached the reunion, the shadows were already stretching long over the lake. Most years, Robert and I were among the first to arrive. Today we were nearly an hour late, and I felt every bit of that delay pressing against my ribs. The reunion was held at my niece Clara's lakeside property, an old white farmhouse with a wraparound porch and enough lawn to fit half the family. From the driveway, I could already hear the sound of children squealing, the smell of barbecue drifting through the air, and the low hum of voices carrying across the yard. I tried to shake off the tension as we walked toward the porch, but it clung to me like humidity. Clara spotted us first. "Aunt Evelyn, Uncle Robert, you're finally here." She wrapped me in a hug, warm and easy, but her eyes flicked over my shoulder, maybe wondering why we'd come so late. We exchanged the usual greetings, and I put on my best smile, even though my eyes kept darting to the road beyond the fence. No SUV, not yet. Then I saw him. Michael. He stood near the grill wearing a collared shirt and jeans, holding a plate like he'd just filled it and didn't know where to sit. His hair had more gray in it than I remembered. His shoulders seemed heavier. His smile, when it came, didn't reach his eyes. "Mom," he said, walking toward me. "Michael," I replied, taking in the faint shadows under his eyes. I wanted to hug him, but there was a stiffness between us that kept my arms at my sides for a beat too long. We managed an embrace, but it was brief, like a formality rather than a homecoming. "You made it," I said. "Yeah, wouldn't miss it," he answered. But he glanced over my shoulder, scanning the driveway the same way I had earlier. That small movement made my stomach turn. Robert caught my eye, a silent question passing between us. "Did you see that?" I nodded slightly. The rest of the family was deep in conversation, cousins swapping stories, little ones chasing each other with paper plates, the clink of ice in glasses. But I couldn't relax. Over the next hour, I noticed things, small things. Michael excused himself from conversations more than once to take phone calls. He never went far, but always angled his back toward the crowd. His voice was low, urgent. Once I saw him step away entirely, heading toward the gravel drive that led down to the boathouse. When he came back, his eyes darted toward the tree line like he was checking to see if someone had followed him. Then there was Jenna, his wife. She's always been polite to me. Never warm, but never rude. Tonight, though, she seemed almost distracted. She kept glancing at Michael like she was keeping tabs on him, her fingers tightening on the stem of her wine glass whenever he stepped away. At one point, I walked past her and heard her say, under her breath, "They said tonight, you can't stall forever." She must have thought no one was listening, but the words landed in my ears like stones. I carried my plate to the porch and sat where I could see the main road. I told myself I was just being careful, but really I was waiting. When twilight settled in, the glow from the string lights around the porch gave the yard a warm, golden haze. It should have been comforting. But then, through the shifting crowd, I spotted something beyond the hedges. Mandy, a man in a baseball cap standing at the far edge of the property, half hidden behind the trees. Too far to see his face, but close enough that he could see everything happening here. He wasn't talking to anyone, wasn't holding a drink, just watching. I glanced toward Michael and my blood ran cold. He'd seen the man too, and for just a second, his expression wasn't the polite, practiced smile he wore for the family. It was fear. Pure, unguarded fear. The man in the baseball cap stayed near the edge of the property for a while, his posture casual enough that anyone else might have mistaken him for a neighbor. But I knew better. He wasn't mingling, and he certainly wasn't here for potato salad. I kept my eyes on him without being obvious, watching how he shifted his weight, how his head turned slightly whenever Michael moved. It was subtle, but it was tracking. When I looked back toward my son, he was deep in conversation with my brother's boy, laughing a little too hard at something that couldn't have been that funny. His hand was wrapped tight around his beer bottle, the label peeling under his thumb. Robert came up beside me on the porch, setting a glass of sweet tea in front of me. "You see him too?" he asked under his breath. "Yes," I said, not looking away. "And Michael's noticed him. Don't pretend you haven't seen it." Robert took a sip of his own tea, his eyes following mine. "Doesn't look like family." "Because he's not," I said, "and he's not here for the food." The rest of the evening unfolded like a jigsaw puzzle, where the pieces didn't quite fit. Every time Michael moved toward the driveway or outbuildings, the man in the cap subtly shifted position to keep him in sight. Once I caught Michael glancing toward the hedges, his jaw tightening before he looked away. And then there were the phone calls. Twice more, Michael slipped away from the main group, once behind the garage, once down the slope toward the dock. Each time his voice carried just enough in the still air for me to catch fragments. Words like, "can't right now," and "I told you, I'm working on it." Jenna, too, seemed frayed. She wasn't chatting with the other women like she usually did, and when I asked her if she was enjoying herself, she answered too quickly, "Yes, why wouldn't I be?" before glancing toward Michael's empty chair. The most telling moment came when I rounded the corner of the porch to fetch more napkins and heard her on the phone, voice sharp. "If they're here, then you need to handle it. No, I don't care, just not tonight." Her back stiffened when she realized I was there. "Oh, Evelyn, I was just checking on the babysitter," she said, smiling too brightly. I didn't press her, not yet. As dusk deepened, fireflies began to blink in the yard, and people started moving inside for dessert. The hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, the smell of pie, all of it felt distant to me. My attention was anchored on that man at the edge of the property. And then, just as we were serving coffee, he was gone. No one else seemed to notice. No one but Michael, who kept glancing toward the darkened tree line as though expecting him to reappear. I made my way over to my son. "Michael," I said softly, "walk with me for a moment." He hesitated, but followed me toward the back porch where the string lights cast a warm circle in the dark. "What's going on?" I asked. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Don't do that," I said. "Don't lie to me. That man wasn't here for the burgers, and you know it. And the calls, the way you keep looking over your shoulder." He cut me off, his voice low. "Mom, you don't want to know." I stared at him, trying to see the boy I'd raised inside the man standing before me, but his eyes darted past me toward the road, and for a brief second I saw pure panic. And then, as if on cue, headlights flashed beyond the trees. 2 quick pulses. Michael froze. "They found me," he murmured, almost to himself. "Who?" I demanded, but he was already moving, slipping past me and disappearing into the crowd before I could stop him. The barn at Clara's property was more decorative than functional, its red paint fresh. Fairy lights strung along the beams for weddings and summer parties. Tonight, it was empty, except for a few stacked hay bales and the faint smell of wood polish. I found Michael there 20 minutes later, leaning against the far wall, his head tipped back, eyes closed. From a distance, he might have looked like he was just catching his breath, but up close, I saw the tremor in his hand as he raked it through his hair. "Michael," I said quietly, stepping inside. He opened his eyes, startled. "Mom, what are you doing back here?" "I could ask you the same thing." I walked closer, keeping my voice steady. "That man out by the trees, the SUV that's been following us all afternoon. The phone calls. You think I don't see it?" He shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting toward the open door, as if checking whether anyone was listening. "You don't understand." "Then make me," I said. "Because right now it feels like I'm standing in the middle of something dangerous, and I don't even know why." He hesitated, jaw tightening. "It's complicated." "Michael," I said, my tone firm, "I am your mother. If someone is threatening you, I need to know. If you've gotten yourself into trouble, I need to know that too." His eyes met mine for a moment, and there it was, that flicker of the boy I used to know, the one who came to me when he scraped his knee, or when a teacher embarrassed him in front of the class. But the flicker was gone as quickly as it came. Before he could answer, something caught my attention beyond the barn doors, a pair of headlights cutting through the dark. The SUV. It slowed as it passed the property's edge, not stopping but not moving quickly either, just enough to make its presence known. 2 beats of light across the grass, and then it rolled on toward the main road. Michael's face went pale. "They're not supposed to be here," he muttered, almost to himself. "Who?" I asked sharply. He ran a hand over his mouth, glancing toward the direction the SUV had gone. "I told them not tonight." "You told them?" My voice rose. "Michael, what are you involved in?" He shook his head. "It's better if you don't." "Better for who? Because from where I'm standing, the only thing I see is you acting like a man waiting for a trap to close." He didn't answer. Instead, he pushed past me and stepped out into the night, heading toward the driveway with quick, purposeful strides. I followed him to the edge of the barn, watching as he paused at the corner of the house, peering toward the road. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he answered it without hesitation. I couldn't hear the other side, but I caught enough of his words to feel my blood chill. "No, I can't. Not here. I said after the weekend. I don't care. That wasn't the deal. Don't—" He stopped abruptly, jaw tightening. "If you touch her—" He turned away from the road and spotted me watching. The look in his eyes was pure warning. "Go back inside, Mom," he said, his voice low and tight. "Please, just stay out of this." "Michael." "Please," he repeated, more urgent this time. And then he walked away, disappearing into the shadows along the driveway. I stood there for a long moment, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my arms. Somewhere beyond the trees, I thought I heard the low rumble of an engine idling, waiting. I didn't know who they were, but I knew this much. Whoever was in that SUV wasn't just following us out of curiosity. And whatever Michael had gotten himself tangled in, it was serious enough that he thought keeping me in the dark was the only way to keep me safe. The problem was, I've never been one to stay in the dark. That night, the reunion house was a patchwork of sleeping arrangements. The younger cousins had claimed the upstairs bedrooms, the teenagers were sprawled on air mattresses in the den, and Robert and I were given one of the guest cabins near the edge of the property. It should have been quiet out there, the kind of silence where you can hear crickets through the screen door. But somewhere around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps on gravel. At first I thought it was Robert, but he was still beside me, his breathing steady. The footsteps moved past our cabin, slow but deliberate, crunching over the stones toward the small trail that led to the boathouse. I slipped out of bed and to the window. The moonlight was thin, but enough to make out the shape of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, walking with his phone pressed to his ear. Michael. I opened the window just a crack, straining to hear. His voice was low, but the stillness of the night carried it further than he realized. "I told you. I'm working on it." "No, she doesn't know. I said I'd have it by next week." There was a pause. Then his tone sharpened. "Don't talk about her. Leave her out of this." Another pause. I could feel my chest tightening. "If she gets involved, she won't be spared." I froze, my fingers gripping the windowsill. She. There was no mistaking who he meant. Michael turned, pacing in a slow circle. "You come here. You risk too much. Just give me time. No, I can't run. That would make it worse." The rest was muffled, but I didn't need to hear more. That SUV, those men, they weren't just after Michael. They knew about me. I let the window ease shut and backed away, my heartbeat loud in my ears. When the footsteps returned, I slid back into bed and kept my breathing slow, eyes half closed. Michael passed the cabin without glancing inside, his head down, his phone now dark in his hand. I waited until I heard the faint click of the main house back door closing. Robert stirred beside me. "Everything all right?" he murmured, still half asleep. "No," I whispered, "but I'll tell you in the morning." The truth was, I didn't want to say it out loud yet. Speaking the words would make it too real, the fact that my son was in trouble deep enough to pull me into danger by association. I lay awake for hours, staring at the dark ceiling, my mind replaying every detail of the day. The SUV's steady tail on the highway, the man in the baseball cap, the phone calls, the way Michael's face had drained of color when those headlights flashed from the road. By dawn, I'd made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to wait for trouble to come closer. At breakfast, Michael was nowhere to be seen. Jenna was at the table, her hair hastily pulled back, dark circles under her eyes. She smiled when she saw me, but it was the kind of smile people use when they want to shut a door in your face without slamming it. "Did Michael leave early?" I asked. He went into town," she said, pouring herself coffee. "Work call, you know him." I just nodded, though I knew that wasn't it. Robert shot me a glance from across the table, and I gave him the smallest shake of my head, "Not yet." Because I knew something else now. Whoever was watching us wasn't just some nameless figure in the shadows. They had a timetable, they had leverage, and they were willing to use me to get what they wanted from my son. By mid-morning, the reunion was in full swing again. Kids running barefoot across the lawn, Clara's husband firing up the grill for another round of burgers, the lake glittering in the sunlight. It was all so normal it almost made me feel like last night had been a bad dream. Almost. Because Michael was still gone. I asked around casually, careful not to sound alarmed. Anyone seen Michael this morning? Most people shook their heads. My cousin Martha said she'd seen him leave a while ago with his phone to his ear. No one thought it was odd. Michael had always been restless at these things. Jenna, however, was different. She kept herself busy refilling drinks, her smile pasted on but brittle at the edges. Every time someone mentioned Michael's name, she tightened her grip on whatever she was holding. A pitcher, a plate, a napkin, as if bracing for a blow. Finally, I cornered her near the cooler. Where exactly did Michael go? She didn't meet my eyes. I told you into town. He needed to make a call. You expect me to believe he's been gone for 3 hours just to make a call? Her jaw set. Evelyn, I can't get into this right now. She stepped away before I could press further. Robert found me on the porch a few minutes later. He had that look on his face, the one that said he'd seen something I wasn't going to like. What is it? I asked. I just ran into town to get more ice, he said. That SUV? It's parked outside the diner, same dent, same missing hubcap. And it's not empty, someone's sitting inside, just watching the road. My stomach dropped. Michael? No sign of him. I didn't hesitate. We're going to follow them. Robert hesitated. Evelyn, they followed us. They know who we are. If we just sit here, we're waiting for them to make the next move. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. All right, but we're not doing this without being careful. We slipped away from the reunion without fanfare, taking the Buick and circling around so we could approach the diner from the opposite side of the street. Sure enough, the SUV was there, parked in the shade of a tree. The driver's seat was reclined slightly, a baseball cap pulled low over the face. We kept going, turned at the next block and waited until the SUV pulled out. When it did, Robert kept a steady distance, mimicking the same careful spacing they'd used on us the day before. The SUV wound through back roads for nearly 15 minutes, eventually pulling into a gravel lot beside a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. We parked 2 blocks away behind an abandoned feed store. From there, I could just make out the SUV's rear bumper. A minute later, another vehicle, a dark sedan, pulled up beside it. Michael got out of the passenger side. Even from here, I could see his posture stiff, tense, like a man walking into a storm he couldn't avoid. He crossed the lot and disappeared into the warehouse with 2 men who looked like they'd stepped straight out of a cautionary tale. One tall and thin, with a long coat despite the heat. The other shorter but broad-shouldered, his head shaved, both moving with the kind of casual menace you can't fake. I felt Robert's hand on my arm. Evelyn. I'm fine, I said, though my throat was tight. 20 minutes passed before Michael emerged again. He was carrying something in an envelope, and he looked smaller somehow, like whatever happened inside had taken a piece of him. He got back into the sedan, which drove off in the opposite direction from the SUV. The SUV lingered another minute before leaving the lot, heading back toward town. We stayed put until both were gone. Robert looked at me. You still think this is something we can ignore? No, I said. But I also think if we go to the police without proof, they'll just tell us to stay out of it. And I knew one thing for certain. If we didn't get ahead of this, the next time that SUV showed up, it wouldn't just be for intimidation. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the black SUV headlights cutting through the dark, that dented bumper filling the rearview mirror. I thought about the warehouse, about the 2 men Michael had gone inside with, about the envelope in his hand when he came out. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. If we wanted answers, we couldn't just wait for them to come to us. Robert wasn't thrilled. You realize how dangerous this could be? Yes, I said. But you also realize how dangerous it is to let them keep circling around us without knowing why. We agreed to keep it quiet. Clara didn't need the family gossip mill turning the reunion into a true crime episode. We told everyone we were going into town for supplies and drove toward the diner, the same place Robert had spotted the SUV yesterday. It was there again. Same dent, same missing hubcap, same driver's seat tilted just enough to conceal the occupant's face. We parked across the street, half hidden by a row of delivery trucks. I kept my eyes locked on the SUV while Robert pretended to check a map. We didn't have to wait long. A man stepped out, not the one in the baseball cap from the reunion, but similar build. He wore a dark jacket despite the warm air and sunglasses that hid most of his face. He walked into the diner, stayed maybe 5 minutes, then returned with a to-go cup. He leaned against the SUV, scanning the street like a man with nowhere to be but a job to do. When he finally got back in, we gave him a good 30 seconds before pulling out behind him. This time, he didn't head for the warehouse. Instead, he took a winding route through the back roads, doubling back twice like he was checking for a tail. Robert matched every move with patient precision, keeping enough distance to blend in. Eventually, the SUV pulled into a small neighborhood on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where the houses leaned on their foundations and chain-link fences sagged with age. He parked in front of a weather-worn blue house with a sagging porch. We kept rolling, turning the corner before stopping. "Stay here," Robert said, but I was already shaking my head. "You think I've come this far to sit in the car?" We got out together, staying on the far side of the street, using overgrown hedges and parked cars for cover. The man from the SUV went up the porch steps and knocked. A few seconds later, Michael opened the door. My stomach clenched. They spoke in low voices, too low for us to catch from this distance, but their body language told a story. The SUV man kept gesturing sharply, like he was giving instructions. Michael's hands moved restlessly, palms up in a pleading motion, like he was trying to buy time. Finally, the man handed him a small object, a phone, maybe, and pointed toward the street before walking back to the SUV. Michael stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the ground before disappearing inside. The SUV drove off in the opposite direction, and I motioned for Robert to follow. We trailed it for another 10 minutes until it turned into the lot of a low-rent motel on the edge of town. The man got out, met up with another figure, possibly the baseball cap man, and they went inside together. We didn't follow them in. That would have been crossing a line even I wasn't ready for. Instead, we sat in the car, silent. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed wasn't pretty. This wasn't just about money. This was about control, about someone holding my son's life in their hands, and maybe mine too. Robert finally spoke. "If we're going to get Michael out of this, we need to know exactly what they want, and we need proof." I nodded slowly. Then we set a trap. We got back to the reunion in time for the late afternoon lull, when the kids were napping and the adults were slouched in lawn chairs, half asleep in the shade. It gave me the cover I needed to find Jenna alone. She was in the kitchen, refilling a bowl of chips, her back to me. I closed the door behind me and she glanced over her shoulder, startled. "Oh, Evelyn." "We need to talk," I said, my tone leaving no room for small talk. Her hand stilled over the chip bag. "About what?" "You know exactly what. Michael, the SUV, the man in the baseball cap, the warehouse, the motel." Her eyes widened just for a moment before narrowing again. "You've been following them." "I've been protecting my family," I said. "But I can't protect what I don't understand. You're going to tell me what's going on, Jenna. Now." She looked down at the counter, her fingers twisting the edge of the bag until it tore. For a long moment, I thought she might try to lie again, but when she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost resigned. "It started 2 years ago," she said. "Michael met a guy through one of his old coworkers, said he had a business opportunity. Quick turnaround, big payout. Michael thought it would be the break we needed." I felt my jaw tighten. "And? It wasn't a business, it was a loan." She glanced at me, eyes full of shame. "From people who don't exactly advertise in the phone book. High interest, short deadlines. At first, Michael kept up with the payments. Then one of his jobs fell through, and he missed one. Then 2. It snowballed." "How much?" I asked. She hesitated. "With interest? Over 60,000? The number made my chest feel tight. "And they think we can just hand that over?" "They don't think they know," Jenna said bitterly. "They know where we live, who we see, where we go. They followed us here, to make sure Michael knows they're serious. I thought about the SUV tailing us on the highway, about the man in the cap at the edge of the yard, about Michael's pale face when those headlights flashed. They threatened him? I asked. They've threatened both of us, Jenna said. And now, they've started mentioning you. Her voice cracked on the last word. I gripped the back of a chair, grounding myself. Why me? Because you're here. Because they think if they scare you, Michael will do whatever it takes to pay them, and if he doesn't... She trailed off, but the unspoken words hung heavy in the air. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to think. Why hasn't he gone to the police? She laughed without humor. Because these people don't leave a trail. No paperwork, no names you can trace. If he goes to the cops without evidence, all it does is make them angrier. I leaned forward. Then we get evidence. Jenna's eyes snapped to mine. How? By making them come to us. By giving them what they think they want. But on our terms. She stared at me for a long moment. Evelyn, they're dangerous. And I've been on this earth 72 years, I said. You think I'm scared of a couple of bullies with tinted windows? Her lips pressed together, but I saw something shift in her expression, the smallest flicker of hope. Michael won't like it, she warned. Michael doesn't have to like it, I replied. He just has to be ready when the moment comes. I straightened, the plan already forming in my mind. If they wanted to use me as leverage, fine. I'd make sure that leverage came with strings they couldn't see, strings that led straight to the police. Because if they were bold enough to follow me onto the highway, they were bold enough to walk right into the trap I was about to set. It happened that same evening, just as the sun was dipping low enough to turn the lake gold. I was sitting on the porch, watching the light flicker over the water, when my phone buzzed in my lap. The number wasn't saved, just a string of digits. I opened the message. Come alone. Bring what he owes, midnight. Old Mill Road warehouse, no police, or you'll regret it. No name, no details, but I didn't need them. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then handed the phone to Robert. He read it once, his jaw tightening. You're not going. I am, I said, just not the way they think. He shook his head. Evelyn, they want me alone because they think I'm the weak link. Fine, I'll give them me and a whole lot more than they bargained for. Before Robert could argue, I stood and went inside. I'd been thinking about this all afternoon, ever since my conversation with Jenna. If these people wanted money and fear, we'd give them neither. We'd give them evidence, enough to put them exactly where they belonged. I called an old friend from my library days, Detective Henry Lowell. We'd known each other since he was a teenager sneaking mystery novels into his homework. Now he worked for the county sheriff's office. Evelyn, he said when he picked up. It's been too long. What's going on? I told him. Not every detail, but enough. The SUV, the threats, the debt, the message I just received. His tone changed immediately. You can't go alone, he said. I'm not, I replied, but I need them to think I am. Can you be at Old Mill Road tonight in plain clothes, with backup far enough back they don't spook? He paused. You sure you want to walk into this? I'm sure I'm not going to let them keep circling my family like vultures. He agreed. We worked out the details where the unmarked cars would park, how we'd keep his team close without tipping them off. By the time I hung up, Robert was pacing the kitchen. You've lost your mind, he muttered. Maybe, I said, but at least I'm doing something with it. We left the reunion quietly after dinner, telling Clara we needed to check on a neighbor's dog. Robert drove us toward Old Mill Road, and we parked a quarter mile from the warehouse. The rest I'd walk slowly, deliberately, the way someone might if they were stalling for courage. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking shape against the fading light. Its corrugated metal siding was rusted in streaks, the kind of place no one had any business being in after dark. The black SUV was already there, idling near the side entrance. The passenger door opened, and the man in the baseball cap stepped out, followed by the broad-shouldered one I'd seen at the warehouse with Michael. You came, Cap said, his tone almost mocking. I kept my voice steady. You told me to. Where's the money? The other one asked. I took a slow breath. Michael doesn't have it. I don't have it. But what I do have, I let my hand rest lightly on my bag, is a way to end this. That caught their attention, but not in the way I'd hoped. The broad one stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "Lady, if you're playing games..." Before he could finish, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights flared from the road. The men froze, eyes narrowing. From the shadows, Henry emerged, badge in hand. Behind him, 2 unmarked vehicles rolled in, doors opening to reveal deputies with hands on their holsters. Cap swore under his breath. The broad one took a step back. Henry's voice was calm but firm. "Evening, gentlemen. Care to explain why you've been threatening Mrs. Carter and her family?" Neither answered. But as the deputies moved in, I saw at the first crack in their bravado, the knowledge that this was no longer their game. The moment Henry stepped forward with his badge, the night seemed to contract, the air thicker, the shadows sharper. The men glanced at each other, the smallest flicker of uncertainty passing between them. "Hands where we can see them," Henry said evenly. His deputies fanned out, moving with the quiet precision of people who'd done this 100 times. The broad-shouldered man raised his palms slowly, his gaze darting toward the SUV like he was calculating the odds of making a run for it. Cap lifted his hands too, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't catch. Henry nodded to one of the deputies, who stepped forward to frisk them. From Cap's jacket came a burner phone, a folding knife, and a set of keys. From the other man's coat, another phone cracked and taped, and a leather wallet stuffed with cash. But then I heard it. The low rumble of an engine from the other side of the warehouse. "Henry," I said quickly, "there's another one." He signaled to his team, and 2 deputies broke off, disappearing into the dark. The rumble grew louder until headlights swept across the lot. A dark sedan eased into view, and my heart stopped. Michael was in the passenger seat. The driver, a man I didn't recognize, barely had time to react before the deputies blocked his exit. Doors yanked open, commands shouted. The driver was pulled out, his hands cuffed behind him. Michael sat frozen for a second, then stepped out slowly, his face pale and drawn. "Mom." His voice cracked like a boy's, not a man's. Henry walked over to him. "You all right, Michael?" Michael nodded once, but it was the kind of nod that meant no. I took a step toward him. "You want to tell me now?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes shifted toward Cap and the broad man, now sitting on the ground with deputies standing over them. They weren't going to stop," he said finally. "It didn't matter if I paid them. They'd find a way to keep me on the hook. And when they said they'd go after you..." His voice faltered. I forced myself to hold his gaze. "So you were just going to keep running until what? They caught you somewhere I couldn't help?" He shook his head. "I didn't know what else to do." Henry stepped in. "You did the right thing tonight. Evelyn calling me. We've been building a case on these 2 for months. Extortion, racketeering, loan sharking. With what we pulled off them tonight and with Michael's statement, they'll be looking at serious time." The deputies began photographing the SUV, logging everything pulled from inside another phone. A ledger with first names and dollar amounts, a small handgun tucked under the driver's seat. Michael rubbed a hand over his face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I never wanted you dragged into this." I stepped closer. "You didn't just drag me into it, Michael. You made it so I couldn't look away. That's the thing about family. We don't get to pretend we don't see each other's mess." He looked down, shame written in every line of his posture. Henry clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "You've got a long road ahead, son. But tonight, you just bought yourself a second chance. Don't waste it." As the deputies loaded the men into their vehicles, I stood watching the SUV's headlights dim for the last time. The dented bumper, the missing hubcap, they'd been symbols of something chasing us, pressing closer every mile. Now they were just metal and glass, evidence in a case that was no longer ours to carry. Michael lingered beside me. "What happens now?" I looked at him, the night air cool against my face. "Now, you fix what you can, and you stop giving people the power to follow you." The warehouse looked different once the cruisers pulled away, quieter, smaller somehow, like the danger had seeped out with the flashing lights. Still, I felt the adrenaline buzzing in my chest. Michael stood with his hands stuffed into his pockets, avoiding my eyes. Robert stayed close, not saying much, just keeping that steady presence I'd leaned on all my life. We drove back to the reunion in silence, the night air cool through the half-open windows. When we pulled into Clara's driveway, the yard was still dotted with strings of lights. A few late-night stragglers gathered around the fire pit. Michael lingered in the shadows as I got out. "Mom," he said finally, "I don't expect you to forgive me. Not for the money, not for the lies." I looked at him for a long moment. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, Michael. And it's not something you get just because you're sorry. It's something you earn by doing better every single day. He nodded, his shoulders sagging, and for a brief second I thought he might hug me. But instead he stepped back, almost as if he knew I wasn't ready. Jenna appeared at the porch steps, her face drawn with relief and exhaustion. She touched Michael's arm, and they walked toward the cabin they were using, speaking in low voices. Inside, Robert made me tea, the way he always does after a storm chamomile with a spoonful of honey. We sat at the kitchen table while the rest of the house slowly quieted down. "You think he'll be all right?" Robert asked. I stared into my mug. "If he wants to be, that's the part I can't do for him." The tea was warm in my hands, but the weight in my chest was heavier than I wanted to admit. The truth was, I'd seen the fear in Michael's eyes tonight. Not just fear of the men chasing him, but fear of what he'd become under their thumb. The next morning, the lake was calm, the surface smooth as glass. You'd never guess what had happened less than 12 hours ago. Most of the family was still asleep when Robert and I packed our bags. I decided we wouldn't stay for the last day of the reunion. Some storms pass, but the air takes time to clear, and I wasn't in the mood for small talk or explaining the circles under my eyes. As we loaded the Buick, Michael came down the path. He looked tired, older, somehow, but there was a steadiness in his step that hadn't been there yesterday. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "You don't need to thank me," I replied. "You need to figure out what you're going to do next." "I will," he said. "I'm meeting with Henry tomorrow. He says there's a program that might help me and I can pay back what I owe legally in installments." I nodded. "That's a start." He hesitated, then added, "I don't know if you'll ever trust me again, Mom, but I'm going to try to give you a reason to." For the first time since this all began, I believed he might mean it. We hugged, brief but real, and then Robert and I climbed into the car. The drive home took us along the same stretch of highway where I'd first spotted the SUV. I glanced in the side mirror more than once, out of habit, nothing but empty road behind us. But the memory of that moment, the cold rush in my stomach, the way I'd told Robert, "Turn around now," stayed with me.